In the early light of June 4, 1942, the Pacific stretched endlessly, calm as polished glass beneath the first blush of dawn. The sun rose over the USS Enterprise, painting its steel decks gold, while men in flight suits moved with quiet precision, their faces drawn but resolute. This was not just another morning at sea. It was the dawn of a turning point in human history. For months, Japan's Imperial Navy had ruled these waters unchallenged, its carriers striking fear across half the world. But this day, the tide would begin to turn. Far beyond the horizon, 4 of Japan's proudest carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu and Hiryu, steamed confidently toward Midway atoll, believing victory certain. What they did not know was that their every move had been read, their codes broken, and their fate sealed by men they could not see. The cryptanalysts of Station Haipo, working tirelessly in a dark basement thousands of miles away. The true Battle of Midway began not on the ocean, but in silence, in rooms filled with typewriters, intercepted messages, and men who understood that information could win wars. Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team at Station Haipo had broken Japan's naval code, JN-25. Piece by piece, message by message, they uncovered Admiral Yamamoto's grand plan to lure the remaining American carriers into a trap and destroy them once and for all. But instead, it was the hunters who would become the hunted. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, commanding from Pearl Harbor, made a gamble that would alter the course of the Pacific War forever. He placed his faith in intelligence, in the unseen, and ordered 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet and Yorktown, to lie in wait northeast of Midway. In that act of trust and courage, America's fate shifted. The men aboard those ships did not yet know it, but they would soon become the authors of one of history's greatest reversals. Aboard the Enterprise, the atmosphere was electric. Flight crews moved across the deck in coordinated chaos, fueling lines snaking between aircraft, bombs hoisted by cranes, signal flags snapping in the wind. The pilots gathered in the ready room, smoke curling toward the ceiling as Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey briefed them. The maps showed the enemy's position, 200 miles northwest of Midway. They would fly far, strike once, and return with barely enough fuel to see the deck again. Many understood they might not return at all, yet none wavered. These were ordinary young men, farmers' sons, students, mechanics, now transformed by duty into the thin line between freedom and defeat. Outside, the engines began to growl to life, deep radial roars echoing across the sea. On that morning, courage wore no cape, no crown, only goggles, flight jackets, and the quiet resolve of men about to face eternity. At 6:45 a.m., engines thundered to life. The deck officer's flag dropped, and the first dauntless dive bombers roared down the deck into the wind, lifting free over the ocean. One by one they rose, forming patterns in the sky like flocks of metallic birds bound for war. Beneath them, the Pacific shimmered with deceptive serenity. Each pilot knew fuel would be tight. There would be no second chance. Above the clouds, they flew toward destiny, guided only by compass, courage, and hope. For nearly 2 hours they searched the endless blue, until at last a faint white trail appeared far below, a lone Japanese destroyer cutting north. McCluskey made a fateful choice to follow that wake. 20 minutes later, the ocean revealed its terrible secret. 4 Japanese carriers, the heart of the Kido Butai, lay spread across the water, decks crowded with aircraft, ordnance, and men. The hunters had found their prey. At 10:22 a.m., the heavens themselves seemed to ignite. From 18,000 feet, American dive bombers plunged through flak and smoke into chaos. Anti-aircraft shells burst like black blossoms around them, tracers streaked upward, and the ocean below erupted in geysers of fire. Lieutenant Richard Best, leading Bombing Squadron 6, centered his sights on the carrier Akagi. 1,000 pounds of steel and TNT fell true, piercing the deck and detonating among fully armed aircraft. A blinding flash followed. Akagi vanished in a towering inferno. Across the formation, Kaga and Soryu were struck almost simultaneously, their decks consumed by rolling orange fireballs. Within 5 minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers were mortally wounded. The most powerful naval air force on Earth was burning before the eyes of stunned sailors. The tide of the Pacific had turned, not in months or years, but in the span of minutes. Amid the towering smoke columns and sinking wrecks of Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, one carrier still fought back. Hiryu, the lone survivor of Japan's once mighty strike force. Hidden under a passing rain squall 10 miles north, she launched her first wave of counterattack. Vengeance came in the form of sleek grey Aichi dive bombers escorted by the deadly Mitsubishi Zeros. They found their mark at noon. The American carrier Yorktown, already a veteran of the Coral Sea, was struck by 3 bombs. Her deck buckled. Flames licked across the hangar. But the crew, drilled in the brutal lessons of Pearl Harbor, fought the inferno back. Within an hour, the ship was operational again, a testament to American damage control that stunned the enemy. Yet Hiryu's second wave came at 2:30 p.m. This time, torpedoes struck true. Yorktown shuddered under the twin explosions, listing badly. Captain Buckmaster ordered abandon ship. Smoke rose like a funeral shroud, and the sea swallowed her slowly as sailors clung to rafts, watching the horizon still alive with fire. The balance of fate now hung on one final duel, Hiryu against the combined might of Enterprise and Hornet. Late that afternoon, McCluskey and his weary pilots rose once more into the golden haze, their fuel low, their faces drawn with exhaustion and determination. At 5 p.m. they found her, the last defiant heart of the Kido Butai. Her deck was crowded with aircraft, engines warming for another strike. The dive bombers came from the clouds, silent as angels of judgment. 4 bombs struck home. Explosions tore through Hiryu's decks, igniting her fuel lines and ammunition stores. The carrier burned from bow to stern, her bridge a pillar of flame. By nightfall, Admiral Yamaguchi refused to abandon ship. "I shall go down with Hiryu," he said quietly. As darkness fell, she glowed like a dying star against the endless Pacific, the final light of Japan's shattered pride. As night settled over the Pacific, the battlefield was transformed into a graveyard of steel and flame. The air still shimmered with smoke, and the sea was littered with oil, debris, and men. Some clinging to wreckage, others motionless. American pilots returned to their carriers with bullet-riddled planes, many running on fumes. Some ditched into the dark sea, their final transmissions fading into static. Of 41 torpedo bombers launched that day, only 6 returned. Nearly every man in those squadrons had gone to certain death, and they knew it when they took off. Yet it was their doomed attack that had drawn the Japanese fighters low, leaving the skies clear for the dive bombers who would change history. Heroism is often quiet, unseen, and unrecorded. But on that June day, courage burned brighter than the fires that consumed the ships below. The Battle of Midway was not just a victory of strategy, it was the triumph of sacrifice. By June 5th, the Kido Butai, Japan's elite carrier strike force, had ceased to exist. 4 carriers lay beneath the waves, along with over 3,000 sailors and airmen. The once invincible fleet that had ravaged Pearl Harbor and swept across Asia was gone, undone not by superior numbers, but by intelligence, audacity, and timing. Admiral Yamamoto, commanding from the distant battleship Yamato, received the reports in disbelief. His masterpiece, years in the making, had collapsed in a single day. The psychological shock rippled through the entire Imperial Navy. Japan would never again take the offensive in the Pacific. For America, Midway was more than a victory. It was redemption. The humiliation of Pearl Harbor had been avenged, and the balance of power had shifted forever. The tide that once carried Japan toward domination now began to recede, dragging its empire with it. In the days that followed, American patrols scoured the area, rescuing survivors and confirming the kills. The ocean was strangely silent now. save for the faint hiss of steam escaping from sinking hulls. Divers later described the eerie sight: twisted propellers, burnt flight decks, and the shattered remnants of planes resting on the seabed. These were not just wrecks, but tombs, the final resting places of thousands. On Enterprise, sailors gathered for a moment of prayer as the sun dipped below the horizon. They were victorious, but few felt joy. They had seen too much: courage, death, and the fine line that separates survival from sacrifice. As darkness returned, one could almost feel the Pacific itself mourning, its waves carrying both triumph and grief in equal measure. History would call Midway the turning point of the Pacific War, but its lessons went far deeper than strategy. It showed that technology, courage, and faith in intelligence could defeat even the most formidable enemy. It revealed the flaws in Japan's grand design, the rigid command structure, the underestimation of their opponents, and the peril of overconfidence. For the Americans, it validated the power of adaptability, the ability to change tactics, repair ships, and learn from every loss. It was proof that in war, information is as decisive as firepower. Those who see first, understand first, and act first, win. And at Midway, that truth echoed louder than the explosions that tore the sea apart. Behind every victory are faces history rarely remembers: the mechanics who fueled the planes, the signalmen who guided landings, the corpsmen who treated burns and shrapnel wounds. These were the invisible pillars of triumph. On both sides of the conflict, men fought not for glory, but for duty. Japanese sailors leaping into burning seas to save comrades, Americans holding their stations amid fire and chaos. War strips away ideology. It reveals humanity in its rawest form. Beneath the uniforms, both sides shared the same heartbeat: fear, courage, loss, and love for home. The Pacific was vast, but in those hours it became a single stage where human will battled destiny. After Midway, the Pacific War entered a new phase. The United States, fueled by industrial might, began launching carriers faster than Japan could replace them. The Essex-class supercarriers rose like steel titans, each one larger, faster, deadlier. Japan, stripped of its elite pilots and crews, could never recover its former edge. From Guadalcanal to the Marianas, the tide rolled westward, relentless and unstoppable. Yet every victory traced its lineage to that morning in June, when a handful of codebreakers, commanders, and pilots defied odds and changed the world. The shadows of Midway stretched across every battle that followed, shaping not just the war's outcome, but the destiny of the modern world. Decades later, divers would find the wrecks resting silently at the bottom of the Pacific: Kaga upright, Akagi broken but proud, Soryu resting on her side. The ships, once engines of war, now teemed with life, coral gardens blooming where bombs once exploded, schools of fish drifting through twisted hangars. The ocean had reclaimed them, transforming death into life. Japan and America, once mortal enemies, became allies. The Pacific that had burned now shimmered with trade routes and friendship. The ghosts of Midway perhaps found peace at last, their sacrifice preserved in the quiet hum of history, a reminder that even the darkest waters can give birth to light. The Battle of Midway stands today as more than a victory. It is a lesson in resolve. It reminds us that freedom is never free, that courage often blooms in the face of despair, and that even when the world teeters on the edge of darkness, a handful of determined souls can pull it back toward the light. On that clear June morning, the fate of nations balanced on the wings of a few dive bombers, ordinary men who became legends. Their actions saved not only fleets but the future itself. Long after their voices have faded, the sea still whispers their names beneath its waves. And as long as free people live, the memory of Midway will endure, eternal, like the Pacific horizon at dawn.